work in the nearby area? Where are you from? What's your backgrounds, roughly? Give me some ideas. Are you bankers, finance people, students? Sorry? Are you professionals of some description?
Yeah.
Well, at least you're all smiling. That's good. That's a start. So I'm currently an academic. I work at the University of Cambridge in the computer laboratory, and so I do research into new kinds of programming languages. That's my thing. However, I also I'm interested in working out how I can take that sort of academic research work and make it useful in the real world. And one of the things I'm interested in is trying to engage people in what programming is, because I think that the society, the world, has no real idea, and I think that's sad and frustrating. Mainly because I like going to parties and talking to people, and when my conversation is hello there, and someone says how are you doing and what do you do, and I say I'm a programmer, usually it kills the conversation. And so for me personally, that's a frustration. And it's not just a frustration for me personally, but I think it's also a frustration for society, because I think society is missing out on what programming is. And I think the easiest way to describe that idea is to think about something we all take for granted, something that we don't even think about, which is the importance of reading and writing, and why society has decided that it's essential for all people to learn to read or write. We are forced to essentially read or write. If we don't read or write, we can't progress through society. Certainly, you couldn't become professionals in the way you are now if you didn't have the ability to read or write. But was it always the way that we had to read or write in our societies? Clearly not. If we're chaffing the wheat on the farm, we don't need to necessarily be able to formalise our ideas with strange symbols on pieces of paper. If we are in a monastery and want to be able to store religious ideas over many hundreds of years, then yes, of course we do. Or if we're historians who want to create diaries or to be able to reflect on things, or we're story writers. But even most of the early stories were word of mouth, passed on from generation to generation. It didn't require us to formalise our ideas with this weird text thing that we're all clearly very used to. And then also, so just think about that. And I mean, obviously, the way to think about why that's so weird is there was a story that I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, it's just a beautiful story, that there was a monk chap who people travelled on a pilgrimage for miles to see. And they travelled for miles to see this monk. And people were saying, oh, why are you going all this way to see this monk? And they said, well, he's done this amazing thing that no one can believe. What is that? Well, he can read without reading the words out loud. So this monk was sitting outside reading a book silently. And the world travelled to see this person because everyone up to that point thought that to read, you must speak the words as you're reading them. Because that's the way the knowledge goes in. You say speak them, it goes into your head. But he just somehow managed to get the words from the paper into his head without speaking. And that blew people's minds. So obviously we take this, I'm trying to say these things just to say that the things we take for granted weren't always the case. And there's going to be things in the future that are just like that. What is the equivalent of being amazed at somebody who can read without speaking the words, that is available in our society today, that we just don't yet see the importance of? What are those things? There's going to be many. And I'm going to argue today that programming is one of them. And I think that it's a shame that society doesn't yet know how to program. I want to try and talk to you the benefits of that, because currently, if you talk to people about why programming is important, and if they have any ideas, it's probably because they say that it's important for our economy and there are lots of jobs in programming. And those things are very true. Very, very, very true. However, that's not the be-all and end-all. Now, I'm talking to an audience that probably has a very close relationship with the financial sector and business as it is today, and very focused on that, and that's all good and excellent. However, if we think about reading or writing in this context, do we learn to read or write purely to do business or to make legal documents? What would the world be like if it was limited to just those kinds of activities? It would be quite tragic. Why is it therefore that the majority of programming we see today is limited to business, legal structures and that kind of stuff? It's clearly nonsense. It's very, very, very important for those things, just like reading and writing is very clearly very important for making legal documents, but there's so much more that the world could be doing with programming that is not yet. And a lot of that is because we haven't yet understood how to engage with it and understand it and work with it. It's only the professional programmers who do these things. Just like it would have been the case that the professional readers and writers right, would be the ones who did the reading or writing, and everyone was left to be spoken to. And so although I think it is really important that we tell people that, I mean, I don't know any programmer who doesn't have a job. I don't know any programmer who can't walk into a job tomorrow. There are just so many jobs that are untrue and very well paid and a wide variety. So although it's true that learning to program can help you if you want to become a professional programmer and help you be employed, I think that the programming jobs are one of the safest jobs we have around. A lot of other our jobs are being replaced with computers, with artificial intelligence, and that's happening more and more, and there are fewer and fewer jobs, which actually is probably a good thing. In the same way, we're not all on the farms digging and ploughing, and we have a person on a tractor who can do the job of a whole village. It should free us up for more spare time, although society doesn't seem to have understood that yet. So although I think it's important that we learn to program for professional purposes, I think it's actually more important we learn to program for all the other purposes. And in the same way, we learn to read or write, not just to write legal documents, we learn to read or write to write letters to our friends, poems, to write lyrics to music, to share ideas, to write diaries, and all these beautiful things we can do with reading and writing. What are the equivalent beautiful things we can do with programming? And so I've written a system, which you might, if you were here earlier, you'd have seen me use, which is a system which turns code into music. And so I'm using code as my musical instrument. And that might sound great. Why have I come here to tell you about that? Why are you sitting down listening to me talk about a new kind of musical instrument? Some of you, hopefully, are super excited by that idea about why code could actually just completely change the way we perceive music in many different ways. And if you're around later, there's quite Q&A, I can really go into detail about many of those things. However, the reason why I created this system wasn't just to make a musical instrument for myself. There's many reasons, and the primary reason was that I had a small little budget to create a project that might engage children in programming. And so there's a question: how do I get kids in schools to learn how to code? And so I started off this project. It was a 3-month project, so very short. And I looked at the kind of, because in the UK we have a new curriculum for computer science, which is fabulous. And so I was looking at the schemes of work and the ideas that the professional educators have created, which were to get children salivating about the idea of doing programming, like just dribbling about the thought of it, like, so I need to do it now. And those ideas had titles like, have fun with sorting. Now, how many of you have ever had fun sorting anything in your lives? Right, some of you might, right? And then you're probably like me, a weirdo who probably would program anyway, right? So if we're looking to find ways to engage people that would already be interested in programming, like me, then that's a great title. But for everybody else, sorting your socks? What are you going to sort? Like, I'm going to put all the books in chronological order, or in colour order. It's just nonsense. So I don't think sorting is a great way to engage most children. Another one sounded like some sort of a drug campaign. It was give binary a try. As if it's some sort of gateway to the rest of programming, right? Once I've given binary a try, that's it. I'm never going back. Nuts. So so I was frustrated by attempts to try and engage children in programming, and I think those attempts came out of people who are already programmers looking at their own childhood and saying, what would I like? And I don't think that's the right way to approach this. So my idea was to take, so I'd already been making crazy music systems with text for many years, but I'd made very advanced tools. So these are tools where I had bands and I was touring the world, making music with crazy text systems. And I was able to make an advance on that opening question in a party. So when people say, what do you do? I can say, well, I'm a musician. Suddenly that's interesting. And then I go, well, actually, I use code, but it's okay. I've got the conversation started at that point. I haven't walked away. But what it will allow you to do is to demonstrate that code is creative. But what I really want to do, and what I'd like to do with you today, is to show you the tools that you could have your own creative experience with code. It's all very well to have people go, look, I'm amazing, I can do this thing, whatever that person's doing, ice skating or jumping or running really fast, whatever. But I think that unless we have our own creative experiences, I think it's a muted idea. And so the goal of this system was to be able to go into a school and teach computer science, but it's also to give you the tools so that tonight, if you wanted to, you could download the system and play with it. Now, that sounds like I'm doing some sort of product speech. I kind of am. This is a product which I've made, but it's entirely free. It's entirely open source. And so I'm not trying to sell you anything. And this product is called Sonic Pi. Let me just give you some information about it. There we are. And these are where you can download it. It's very small, but this is the Sonic Pi website. If you want to tweet about it, Sonic-Pi. Maybe if I just put it here like this, you'll be able to see it better. And so the idea here is it's entirely free, but it's also available for Macs, PCs, and if you don't, this is trying to lower the barrier to entry. So there's a couple of barriers to entry, or three, I see. One is cost of things. If it's expensive, that's a barrier to entry. So making it free gets rid of that barrier. The other one is what kind of hardware do you need? If it needs to run on another thing, you have to buy the thing to use it. So that thing in this case is a computer. This is a £2,000 MacBook Pro. That's a huge barrier to entry for most people, right? So this software runs on this, which is great. If you have a Mac at home, you can just use it. If you have a PC, it also runs on Windows. But if you have neither of those things, there's these little chaps here. Have you seen these? Raspberry Pis. This is £25. This software comes pre-installed on this. So if you have a Raspberry Pi at home, you have my software on it already. And so it's there ready to go. Yeah, question?
No, when did your software, I've got some Raspberry Pis, but they're a couple of years old.
Yeah, it will be on it, but you need to update. Yeah. And also the Raspberry Pis, last year there was a version 2 of the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, I've got the version 1.
Yeah, the version 2 radically better. This is the version 3, which is even better, but the version 1 you should only use for you should try not to use it, basically. It's not the best computer. The version 2 was radically better. So the kind of things I'm showing you, all the examples in the system will run on the 1, but it will struggle. Whereas the version 2 and 3, you'll be fine. But there are schools using version 1s to do classes. But if you want to have a real fun experience, you want a bit more of a better computer. Yeah, so again, it's to lower the barrier to entry, so that's cost of the software, cost of the hardware, and the other one is how do I get started, right? And so if you press this help button, you get the tutorial here. I'm just making it a white note so you can maybe see that better. And down here is all the sections of the tutorial. And I'll show you, I'm not going to walk through it now obviously, but I'm just showing it exists. And this is basically a complete book. It's like 40,000 words. There's a ton of stuff in here to show you everything you need to know about the system. And the cool thing is, I think, is I've written it for children and adults who know nothing about music or computing. So if you don't know any of those things, or you know some of them, you'll be fine, right? So this is how to get started. So tonight, if what I've said has excited you, download Sonic Pi, work through the tutorial, you'll be fine. Let's get it away. So, but I'm going to show you what it is. I think there's lots of interesting commonalities between requirements. So I'm going to make 2 claims right now, which you might not think are claims you can make in the same sentence about the same product. It's quite ludicrous claims. One is, this is a fabulous tool to teach computer science. Claim 1. Claim 2, this is a fabulous tool to perform in nightclubs. Right? And I can back those claims up by saying I've given many workshops in schools, teaching it, and 2 nights ago I was in Antwerp giving a performance in a nightclub. But I'm going to try and convince you that this is the case. And so, claim 1 about how to get started teaching stuff in schools, hello there. All I've said so far is that I'm going to show you a demonstration of my software called Sonic Pi. Sonic Pi is a piece of software which I've written to teach kids how to code, but also to perform in nightclubs as a DJ. And you can do this both at the same time. So, and it's entirely free, and you can download it for your Mac PC, and it's also available on Raspberry Pi. So, but I'm really not trying to sell the software, I'm trying to sell the idea that coding is creative. And so in a classroom, anyone been in a classroom recently? Yeah? What's your experience with classrooms?
I teach to use Scratch and Python.
Oh, you're a teacher?
No.
Oh, okay, but you go in and help?
Yeah.
So like Code Club or?
Yeah.
Cool. And so I guess those kids are self-selected kids who want to go to an after-school club.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So you got the focus kids.
That's right, yeah.
And are they running around like nutters sometimes?
No.
Okay. So in the classroom I went to, right, there's a question.
No.
No, you're just holding your pen. What I say. The classroom I went to recently, well, a lot of the classrooms I went into recently, there's a lot of the job of a teacher is to manage the children to make sure that they're focused, so that we can teach them stuff. And they're all running around everywhere, spinning around on the chairs and all that kind of stuff. And
They get you in the door.
Sorry?
They get you in the door. They're not focused.
Oh right, yeah. Each school's got different cultures, yeah. So the one I went to, they couldn't do that. It was a difficult school. So if they're actually not doing really dodgy things, that's a good thing, right? So And the teachers have all sorts of strategies of like sort of clapping their hands and counting down. Like children are going to say something in 5, 4, 3, and then the children are quiet. They have an opportunity to say a sentence or two. What are your 1 or 2 sentences to teach computer science? It's hard, right? You've been really well behaved, all of you. You haven't really shouted or spun around in your chairs. So I've had a lot of time to talk to you and say lots of things already. This is not the case in many schools. And so, if your first sentence is give binary a try, or have fun with sorting, it's not really going to get them excited. They're going to start spinning on the chairs again. So, and then also, if the software you're using to teach these things is really hard to start, like if you're a programmer, any of you programmers here? Right? Okay. Are you like, what do you use? Emacs or Visual Studio, or what do you use? Vim, right? Yep, cool. Visual Studio, right? Eclipse, all right, okay. So we've got lots of different. I mean, when you start these things, you've got to create a new project, especially with the big IDEs. What kind of project do you want to create? Where do you want to save the project? What do I start? Where do I start typing? How out of the many buttons? What do I need to press? Where do I need to run the thing? Am I compiling it or interpreting it? There's lots of questions to ask. So if you're a professional programmer, then totally that's what you need to know to be able to do those. But if you're teaching, it's almost like there's 2 lessons just actually opening the thing before you even start. Which is where Scratch, for example, is fabulous. There's an application, just open up, and then you can just drag blocks of code in, press the run button, and then you see some visual modifications on the screen. There's this little cat, he dances around. Right? So you can make it dance like that, or like this, and kids like it. And then you can write your own sprites and not have a cat, but have a bucket or a chicken or whatever you want. So Sonic Pi is designed for exactly this, so that you open it up, you get something like this. This is telling me what it's doing, so this is what I did before when I was making some music earlier, and here's where I'm going to get the computer to do something. And the simplest command to write is the word play, and you choose a number. And it makes a beep. Right, so that's the first program, and if you're a teacher, there's lots of opportunities for learning. So you can talk about this as a function called play, and the function play takes some sort of parameters, something you can change. Happens to be the note we're playing. This is a number. Numbers are wicked, right? So if you do finance, you probably use numbers a lot. So what do numbers do? Come on.
Give you values.
Sorry?
Give you value.
Give you a value, yeah. And what kind of values can they give you? Yeah, and what's the difference between 2 values? If they're different?
One's big, one's small.
One's big, one's small. Right, yes, so let's just get into the simplest thing. It's one of those things that we don't really think about, the simplicity of these things. And the cool thing about numbers is they go up and they can go down, big and small, and that value is how far up and how far down in our scale, right, are we going? And so with computer science, when we program, what we're doing is we're looking for relationships between things, many times. And so numbers have that lovely property, they can go up and they can go down, so we can use them to map and model other things which have a similar property of going up and going down. I might be saying really obvious things to you, but these are just very simple, important things. And so at this point here, by choosing a higher number, I can get something which goes up. So what goes up and down in the musical world? Yeah, pitch, the height of the note. So, and oh, did you hear that? Yeah, if you were a bat, maybe you would have heard that. But so you can obviously go too high that you can't. Well, the speakers probably wouldn't have produced the sound, but you can talk about the range of hearing, too low to hear. And so already we have lots of opportunities to talk about physics at this point. How are the sounds created? What can we hear? What can't we hear? Just from one command. What's also interesting maybe to you is I can do this kind of thing, which is in between 80 and 81. So I'm not limited to whole numbers. I can use any number. And then, so at this point, I can make the claim that I can play any notes that you can imagine. Give me a note and I can play it. 92. Not sure. I've not tried that one. I don't think. No, it might not work. Oh, okay, fine. Yeah. 92 works. Any other numbers? Like, what's your favourite number? Sorry?
Pi.
Pi. I don't have that. Oh. Is it that? No? Okay. 4, 5, 9, 7, 2 or something? 2, 6. It's too low. It's too low, you see. I can multiply by some number, like by 50. Oh, there we are, or 40. So yeah, so you can do maths in there. So I can take some numbers and do something like this. So yeah. So,
How much is an octave then?
how much is an octave? So yeah, so the real a better question probably at this point, and which will then lead into your question, is what the hell is this 60? What does it map onto in the musical world? Well, there was this system called MIDI, which was around in the 80s, which allowed you to plug electric keyboards together, and then they had to essentially turn a note into something, a message they could send to another keyboard. So I could hit this keyboard and have that keyboard play. And so they created a system which allowed them to send numbers between 0 and 127. And this is halfway up that scale. And then they mapped that 0 to 127 to a piano. So every whole note going up is a semitone. And so if I go from C to C sharp to D, I've got up two notes. So if I play 60, 61, so I'm going up semitones. That's a chromatic scale if you know about music. And so an octave is 12. So if I play that, I can go up octaves by just doing basic maths. Notice I've only just written one line of code so far. Now I could talk for another half an hour about this. And of course then this is good because you can't do this on a piano. You can do it on a violin or a fretless bass, but you're able to play any note. And the importance of this is that we're breaking away here out of the Western traditions of music, which I think are very constrained and limiting. And so we're able to really play any note. So that's great. Kids can play any notes. The next question is, what about playing a melody? They want to make their own little melody, or they want to take a favourite track and take the melody out of it and play it back. So let's play note 66, and then let's play note, I don't know, 72. Ooh, okay, so that might be surprising to you, depending on what your background is. I don't know, you've seen systems like this, you won't have done, because it has a very different sort of semantics or way of behaving than any of the programming language which exists. But one way of thinking about this is that the computer does instruction 1, and it's like a relay race, and it does that, passes the baton to line 2, line 2 then does its thing, and that's to play 72, and then there's no more lines, and then we finish the race. And so we're doing 66, then 72, but because computers, when they're racing, are insanely fast, it sounds like they're playing at the same time. So then we have like this notion of a chord, 2 notes at the same time, purely on the merits of the fact that if I were to play this piano and then this piano, one after another, but so quickly, they're actually the same. But this is not actually how this works, because this is a musical instrument. These are actually played exactly at the same time in a sample accurate way, so down to sub-milliseconds. But that's one way to think about it. So this isn't giving us melodies, this is giving us chords. So essentially I can play any number of notes at the same time now, which is quite nice, right? So let's play, I don't know, 79. Let's just we can find ones we like. And so this is the thing, is you don't need to know what chords and scales are, you can just choose numbers, and if you don't like the numbers, you choose other numbers, and you keep doing that until you like it. But to make a melody, we need one more command, and that command talks about something else we haven't talked about. So far we've talked about pitch, how high or how low. What else do we need to talk about when we talk about melodies? What's the missing concept? Sorry? Time, yeah. So sequence and time, yeah. What order to play things and when to play them. And then if you add what note to play, we have all we need for melody. So we just have one more command called sleep. I'm going to sleep for a second and sleep for half a second. And now I can make a melody. Now at this point, I have pretty much all of Western notation. So if I can take any melody, any bass line, and I can, with these 2 commands, I can now play it back in Sonic Pi. So kids do. And they'll make their own melodies, or they'll take their frozen track and they'll copy it across to this. And that's an interesting exercise, is to take sheet music, decode that into MIDI notes, and then re-encode it into this. That's actually a really interesting thing to do, and not too hard. You can teach them the basics of that. So already with these 2 commands, we have the ability to make any melody, which is pretty crazy. You talked about duration. All these notes, they all sound for the same length of time, so maybe that's missing. So what we can do is we can add a release time, how long it takes for the note to fade out. So by default it's 1, but if I make it shorter, now I'm able to then change the length of the notes, which is getting us even further to being able to take any score and be able to reproduce it with the system. Release is one of many commands which can change the volume. So if I go into the information, into the tutorial, there's a section up here on duration with envelopes. You can see here, this is how the standard note works. It goes from quiet to loud instantly and it takes some time to fade out. So this is our release time. So if you have a longer release time, it's like this. A shorter release time is like this. So you can actually see these. And you can also start talking about how long it takes to fade the note in if you want to. So you can fade it in over a long time. You have percussive notes. You could actually keep the note at the same volume for a while if you want to. You can start manipulating these things. This is called an ADSR envelope if you know about synthesizers. But the point is, right, I'm trying to say, is that you do not need to know any of this stuff to make a sound. But if you ask the question, how do I make my sound go loud and quiet, and control that, then there's tools. So this is what I'm trying to say with this system, and I think when we're having education systems, I think this is a really good model to have, is to have the simple things be really simple to do, but then when you want the depth, you can start adding it on. And so I don't need to talk about release time unless I care about how long my note lasts. I can just write something like this and have it be interesting in its own way. But at this point then, once you start talking about Western notation, what else does Western notation have? Has which instrument to play. So play this melody with violin, play this one with cello, play this one with flutes. So I have the equivalent of that, and it's called use_synth. Now I can choose which sound to play with. So now I can crazy sounds. So they're all sort of 80s style sounds. Let's go for this one. Or let's think about what else have we got. FM. So we have all these things built in. And the cool thing about these sounds is they're like buying a keyboard. If I bought a keyboard from a shop, the sound doesn't have its sound, it has lots of controls. I can modify how the sound sounds. And so let's look at the Prophet sound, for example. If I look at this, I mean, I'm not saying you can see at the back, but you can see there's these black lines here. There's 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 different knobs you can change. So if you don't like how that sound sounds, you can really modify it. Now, I mean, again, like, you don't need to know this now, but it's just there, right? And so you can go and you can say, well, actually, let's take this Prophet in, let's play notes 30. Let's change the release time to be 8. It's quite nice. But I can change a cutoff value to be something else. What on earth is cutoff? Oh, make it much more mellow, right? So now I can try 80. So again, I can change how the sound sounds by modifying these parameters. And there's 13 of these different kind of controls that if you learn about them, you can really modify the sounds. But if you don't need to change the sound's qualities, if that's not interesting to you, you just don't need to include it, right? So it's just there as depth. So this is where I'm making this claim, it's simple to teach with, but it's also powerful in a nightclub, right? In a nightclub, you don't want to be doing this, right? It's not gonna, well, maybe. I don't know what kind of nightclubs you go to, but that might work. But yeah, you want to be doing something more like this, right? And changing the timbres and modifying it and having it sound really nice. And what's also important to say is these sounds aren't pre-recorded. They're all synthesized live inside the computer using lots and lots of mathematics, all running in a soft real-time mode. So it is emulating the old school 70s synthesizers that Tangerine Dream would be using, you know. So these big massive walls of synthesizers, of cables, of patch wires, that's all inside here. And that Prophet synth is actually pretty sophisticated. I can show you the design of it, and it will fill the whole page with lots of little modules. And if you're interested later, I can show you this, and we can even spend time talking to how it works. So again, there's that depth if you need it, but if you just want to make a sound, and actually a lot of these live coding systems, these systems for making music, have traditionally been very hard to use. Like to make a sound with something called Super Collider, well, you can't. You have to design the sound first, then you can trigger it. And having to learn how to design a sound is a whole separate entity in itself. So this means you don't have to do that. Right, so what else can you do with the system? So I've shown you how to do play and sleep and change a synth. But I'm making this claim you can use in nightclubs. Well, one other thing you can do is you can play pre-recorded sounds. So you can take any sounds as a WAV or AV file, so you take your iPhone, record things, and then you can, this word sample gives you a gateway to play any of those sounds back. Now, you could obviously record your own and play them back, but there's also a bunch of built-in ones just to get started with. And these sounds are all Creative Commons Zero license, so there's no licensing issues. You're free to use them. And so I can get this choir sound and play that back. But then the cool thing about samples is we can start to manipulate them as well. So we don't just have to play them as they were recorded, we can stretch them or shrink them. And so if I change the rate to be a half, it comes back lower and takes longer. So now I've turned that sort of boy singing sample into some sort of crazy, dark bass. And so, just by stretching the sample out, I can really modify it. And I can also, notice how it changes the pitch as well. When you stretch something, it will change the pitch, that's the perception we get. And so we can also change the rate so that it actually changes the pitch by notes that we understand. And I have an option called R pitch for that. So now I can start no modification of the pitch, but I can go for 3. So now I've got some sort of way of triggering it like an instrument, right? I'm manipulating the sample as if I'm playing a keyboard. You don't get the same level of control you do with a built-in synthesizer that's on the fly synthesized, but you have access to sounds that Sonic Pi hasn't got already. That's a lot of fun. And of course then you can also play pre-recorded samples like the Amen break, which is one of the most famous drum loops in the history of music. And why is it famous? Well, actually it's really useful for chopping up and manipulating. It sounds good played slow, it sounds good played fast. So one of its first usages was by NWA with a album Straight Outta Compton. So what they did is they did some like hardcore rapping on top of the Amen break played slowly. So if I play it with rate 0.5, you start rapping, it's like old school 80s hip hop was this kind of sound. But then obviously in London, in Bristol, we had the drum and bass stuff, and that was much more like this, but they would mash it around. I can show you how to do that later if you're interested. And then you've got like jungle and much faster dance music, and that's the same sample played faster, right? So by changing the rate of the sample, I can move to different genres of music, which is pretty exciting. And again, just one line of code to do this kind of stuff. And so that you can play around with these things. But the next question would be, if I've got like a loop like, let's go for, what's going to be interesting to play back? This one maybe. Right. So I've got that sample there. If I change the cutoff value to be 70, it's going to make it less harsh. Maybe 90. So what I want to do next, potentially, is to have that repeating time and time again. So what I can actually do is I can create a loop, and because I know this sample is 8 beats long, 8 samples long, I can just sleep for 8 and end the loop. And now I have a system which will just play this loop from the end of stuff, so I have a basic of all my tracks. Right, so it will just go forever, which is pretty cool. So now I've got my drum track, and then maybe I want to do some sort of bass. So let's go to another buffer over here, and then let's create another loop where I'm going to play some bass, and maybe I'm going to do something like create a synthesizer, use synth. So I'll actually show you how to do it. I've shown you already. Use synth TB303. That's sort of an old school acid bass sound. I can play note E1, so you can also, instead of playing numbers, you can actually, if you know Western notation, you can just use that, right? So you don't need to use it to get started. And I think that if you teach this stuff by focusing on music theory as a starting point, I think that alienates most people. So teach the numbers, because everyone understands numbers, they go up and they go down. But if people come with music knowledge, then they can use this stuff. So if they're playing at E1, I'm going to have a release time to be short, and I'm going to use a cutoff to be 70, say. Oh, and it's asked me to do it too many times, so I need to sleep. I killed it. Yeah, I've killed the synthesizer. Let me hold on now. If you ask it to do too much like that, it dies. Let's reboot it. Oh, no, I totally killed it. Right. The cool thing in the early days, it used to crash a lot. And the kids would hate that. So I basically made it so that it automatically saved all your work, right? So it's just opened me up to where I was before. So now There's my synthesizer. That's a bit boring there. What I actually want to do is maybe change the value from 70 to maybe 80 and maybe to 90 randomly. So we can ask the computer to say, well actually just choose me a random number between 70 and 130. Right, that's my bass line, right? So I've got that, I got this, I want to play them at the same time. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut and paste this, and I'm going to play them now like this. Maybe I should change the order now to that. Right, great. We've got the bass line, we've got the drums, we've got the bass line. It's not working. This is the problem. It's a problem because it's what everyone wants to do. Everyone wants to play two things at once. They want to play the melody at the same time, the bass line, the drums at the same time, the singing. They want to do multiple things at the same time. It's typical of music to have multiple members of a band, or even if you're one person, to be doing multiple things, right? The problem is this approach, it doesn't work. Can anyone tell me why this doesn't work? So it's sequential. Yeah, so if we go back to an earlier analogy about relay races, you've got this relay race baton essentially, which is which line of code is currently running. And only one line of code could be currently running because you've got one relay race baton. Just in the same way in a relay race, there's only one person running in the team. The rest of the people are waiting to run, or they already have run. So the relay race, this loop just says this is in a circle. The relay race the baton gets to line 2. You hear that sound, it starts the drums off, right? Then the relay race gets to this thing and it just pauses for 8 seconds. And it goes back to line 2, then 3, then 2, then 3, forever. The relay race baton never gets down here. So if you imagine having a line of people in a relay race, we're going to go down a relay race. Well, if we put that line in half and put them both in circles, then the relay race baton just goes around in this circle forever and never gets to this circle. So the only way to solve this problem is to either interleave these like we're knitting, which is a more complicated conceptual thing to do, or have 2 relay race batons, right, and have 2 races going on at the same time. That's not too hard to think about. However, if we're in a school, and so far we've just done school context, we're about to break out now into nightclubs, from schools to nightclubs, which sounds crazy, but actually, when the 10-year-old children are using this system become 18, you wait to see how the music industry is going to change. It's going to be amazing. So, we've got these 2 things going around, but actually in schools, we're always focusing on the curriculum. And we say, what does the curriculum say for this problem? The curriculum says, sorry, you can't do this. We only do this kind of thing, it's called concurrency, at university level. So, nope, children can't do this. What a rubbish answer. And the kids obviously don't give a monkeys about the curriculum. They just want to play their rhythm at the same time as their bass line, right? But the teacher says no. So my job as a programmer, who's interested in trying to help children do what they want, because every school I've been to, and there's hundreds of schools I've been to, within the first 2 hours, a number of children ask this question every single time. So it's clearly what everyone wants to do. So my job has been, well, how do I sneak it in? Without actually, so if the teacher doesn't really know what's going on, that's fine, but if they do, then that's even better because they can talk about the fact that they've taught something which isn't in the curriculum, but in a way which doesn't require a whole other lesson, which they don't have the allocation for. They can't allocate a lesson to something not in the curriculum. So this loops is in the curriculum, that's totally fine, right? But concurrency isn't. So what you do when you're a programmer is to create new kinds of languages, is to say, well, okay, well, how can we modify this so that they're allowed to do it, but it doesn't actually change the structure. So I've invented something called a live loop, lice loop, that'll be pretty cool. So I just change these to live loops and run the code. Doesn't work yet, and I've got this error down here, which is a bit small for you to read, but when you're programming, you can see it here. And it says, live loop needs to have a unique name. Now, what we're doing now is we're breaking out from the classroom into the nightclub or onto stage, where we have now a band, 2 members in our band. Sally is playing the drums, and Kate, she's playing the TB303 synthesizer, right? So we have 2, and in the same way in band names, bands we have names of members of bands, our live loops also need to have names. So this is Kate playing the TB303 fat acid bass, and this is Sally playing the drums, right? So now, we've got it working. So we have a starting point to allow children to do what they want, but all we've done really is change it from loop to live loop and give them different names. And I think actually the names is fun because kids like to choose their own names of what they're doing. Maybe the names of people, maybe the names of the style of music, maybe they're just ridiculous names, and it's really fun to see what kind of names they come up with. However, this also does one thing now. So I've told you one thing it does which is not in the curriculum, which is concurrency. But it does another thing which basically no programming language has. Because people in the programming world don't really tend to want to do this, because most programs that we write for industry are things that, parts of business that we want to be able to formalize, but in a way which is reproducible, right? So I write my code, I run my business on it, and I know it's going to work, right? That's the goal. And so obviously code never does work, so we put a lot of effort into making sure we can find out how to make it work. So we test it, we formalize it, we might write logical proofs, we might use sort of types, all these tools that we have in programming to try and make sure this program is accurate, so it does the same thing time and time again. Now, if you're a business, that's really important. If you're an artist or just a normal person, that's not what you want to do. You just want to do stuff and change around and have fun and play. And actually, I think it turns out in business, we're starting to actually see more and more uses where people want a quick response from a computer. Even maybe a bit of a messy response. It doesn't have to be super accurate. I just want a response so I can ask another question in my system or my business and another response. And so if I'm able to ask one question a day, because it takes the programmer a day to formalize the computer to actually give me the response, I'm going to be very careful about my one question is, because that's my rate. Whereas if I can ask one question a minute, I'm going to ask loads of questions. They're going to be random, they're going to be rubbish questions. But what might happen is one of the crazy questions might yield something really interesting and then maybe go down this path I would never have normally gone down, right? Just because I was surprised by the answer. And so I think there's actually an importance in the future of business for programs where you're not caring about the accuracy, you just want to get lots of answers. Because if something surprises you, then you can say to the person who's going to spend a day doing a very accurate answer, can you just look into that, please? And they might come back and say, well, actually, that was a wrong answer. Or they might say, yes. And then suddenly you've got a new important thing to look at. So being able to change things on the fly and change things quickly actually is useful in business, I would argue. It's also extremely useful when you're making music on stage. Because if all it did was this, right, we're off, everyone's dancing, and now I want to change the cutoff to 110 to hear the drums more. So I'm like, nightclub, can you just stop a second, right? Stop dancing, I'm going to change the music for you. Right, okay. Ready now? Right, you can dance again, right? Oh, now I'm going to change something else. Stop that. It's not going to work, is it, right? So I need to be able to change this whilst it's running. The live loop does it for you, right? So next time around the live loop, that drum is going to be louder. Right? And maybe I want to change this note. And I can start to change this around. Maybe I want to make this release longer. So you can sort of see now that the ability to ask questions of my system and get responses quickly allows me to experiment and to play and to tinker, and that can be useful in all sorts of contexts. It's particularly useful when you're performing. And it's also very useful in schools, so kids can say, well, what the hell is cut-off? Well, I can start playing and changing the numbers. What does release do? I change the numbers. And if it's giving me fast feedback, I'm more likely to continue to experiment and to continue to play. So, what have I shown you so far? I've shown you how you can play notes, any notes, wait any amount of time between the next notes, how you can play any pre-recorded sound, including the ones built in. Like this, I've shown you how to actually loop these, and then even then to live loop them with a name, and then how to be able to perform with them, right? One thing though that's often what kids ask is maybe they've got their, you think about this, if I have my, also what you can do as well, instead of looping forever, you can just say, can you play me something 6 times? So maybe I'm going to play my use synth, we're going to say chip lead, and I'm going to say play note E1 and release short, and then sleep for 1 or 2 flat seconds. Now, it's my little riff. So the kids are like this and say, well, that sounds cool, but I want it to sound like it's in a really big room. Can you do that? So of course the answer to that, if you know about music, is reverb. But typical systems that do music with code, well, you probably haven't seen many of these systems, are written by computer scientists or artists who are writing things for themselves, and they're typically very hard and complicated to use. And if I had more time, I could show you how other systems do this, but it's really complicated, which means when you're teaching kids this stuff, well, that's way beyond the computing curriculum in computer science lessons, and so the teacher's never even going to spend a second showing kids how to do reverb. So although that's something they creatively want, it's something that they're not allowed to do. And that could be a frustration, and also a frustration for the teacher, because if the kid says, I want to have it sound roomy, and the answer is no, then they're quite likely to lose a little bit of engagement. Right? And so if you can find ways to maintain their engagement that doesn't interrupt too much with the actual curriculum concepts, then that's a good thing. So having the different sounds, for example, in Sonic Pi is exactly one of those things. Clearly, playing synthesizer, or whatever it is, chip lead versus piano, is not interesting to the computer science curriculum, but it is interesting to the kids because they're able to express themselves. And then what you do is you say, create the music you want to create. Oh, and also see if you can use a for loop, or see if you can use a randomization, or see if you can use a function, and all these things you can do with this. I haven't shown it, I haven't got much time, but you can do all the stuff in the computer science curriculum you can do with the system. But reverb, too complicated. However, once you've understood this thing, this do-end block, it's really important. Do here, end here. And actually it's essential, because what I need to say is that, for example, if I do this, loop, ambi lunar lands, what I'm doing here is I'm saying I want to do this 6 times, and then do this. So, right, and this lunar land isn't being repeated 6 times, but this chip lead synth is being repeated 6 times. So I clearly need to tell the computer which bits of the code should I repeat, which bits of the code should I not repeat. And so I know I'm going to do something 6 times, but what is it I'm going to do 6 times? Well, it's everything between the do and the end. So that's like a box. I put the code in that box, and then that gets repeated 6 times. This code is not in that box, so it doesn't get repeated. And you can even see that the computer's actually put this bit of white space here, so it's indented that code to say this is inside that box. So the notion of box is actually really important, because if you think about reverb, actually one way of describing reverb with a system like this is to say, well, here's a box, and everything in that box make it sound with reverb. So I need another box. So let's put that box in another box. Right, so now we have 2 boxes. This one here, which hasn't got any, not what kind of box it is, we haven't told it yet, so it's not going to work yet. But we've created a box, and then this is inside that box, and then it's inside that box. It's like Russian dolls, right? So the play E1 is the smallest doll inside of the larger doll, which is inside the larger doll of the reverb. And so all we need to do here is to say what kind of box it is. So reverb box. If we get rid of this thing now, you can see here it's got reverb. And just like the synthesizers, I can change the parameters of this. Reverb has a room size parameter. So now we have the ability to turn the sound into something more interesting and echoey. And again, if the kids know about these do-end blocks, which they've had to learn if they want to do iterations 6 times, then you just say, well, instead of saying 6 times, just say it with reverb. And then they can add reverb to any of their tracks. In addition, they can nest these things. If I wanted to do echo and then reverb, I can do that. I can change the phase duration of it, so how fast the echo happens. If I then make this sleep, change the mix time, mix amount. So to really change the sound. And notice that all I'm doing is tweaking these numbers and listening, and then tweaking and listening, and that's how I will compose a piece of music and modify it this way. And so this is just a lot of fun just to play with this. And the important point really is that all this stuff I've shown you so far, I've got into schools and taught 10-year-old kids in a couple of hours. Right, and I'm not making this up. So if you think this is complicated and confusing, Well, you need to really try your best, actually, and this is a hard challenge, in your heads, to make a clear separation between what's familiar and not familiar, between what's complicated and not complicated. Because too often, when something is unfamiliar, we mistake it as being complicated. It's just that we haven't yet spent the time to learn it. And so the only way really that you can see this as just being unfamiliar rather than complicated at this point is to trust me. So I'm asking you to trust me that this isn't complicated, and trust the children I've gone into the schools and taught the stuff to, that they can do this. There's a school in Newcastle that every week, in a primary school, so 10-year-old kids are performing in assembly to the rest of the school every week using this system, different children. And they're practicing for the whole week, and then they do a performance. Next week a new person, next week another person. I watched a video of these two girls practicing this stuff over FaceTime, right? Practicing for their assembly performance. I remember when I was at school, I played this clarinet and I was forced to play for the whole school. And the whole school's like, oh, Sam's playing clarinet again. And I'm like, oh, I'm playing for the school. No one wanted to do it except for the music teacher. But I think that maybe if you're making synthesized sounds, maybe there's a chance that the kids are going to make music that they're more likely to want to listen to. Be able to create music that the other children are more likely to want to listen to. I think everyone might be a bit more happier, maybe except for the music teacher who wants you to play Mozart's Minuet and Trio, Part 2, Phrase 3 or something. But I think again we can get much closer to where we were going before. A few more things to show you, just because it's just quite fun. We can also do something like in our live loop. We've got our. What should we do? Should we just go for beeps? Play note E1, release time short, and we can see for 0.125 seconds. We've got this beep now, so I can show you how you can take this and turn it into something interesting. So we start with something very simple that hopefully you can. Does this make sense to people? Playing at E1, then again and again and again, right? E1's a bit too low, so perhaps E2. Or maybe E1's quite good with different synth, the detuned saw wave. Oh, that's better, right? So now, maybe I want to play different notes. So what I can do is I can use this thing called a ring, which is like a number of notes that's going to go round and round and round, just like a ring. So my first notes, second notes, and third notes. Well, actually, if I just use a ring like this, actually treats it like a chord, playing all 3 octaves at the same time. I want to do one, then the next, and the other. So, like in a clock, my little second hand ticks round. I can actually ask this ring to tick round. Now I've got an arpeggiator, so it's doing the first note, second note, third note, round and round and round. It's quite nice. So now I can start playing this off value. Oh yeah, the other thing is, if you put a value like this, for example, with the old school synthesizers, if you plugged in this thing to that thing and there were the wrong things to plug into, because no one tells you which you can and can't, the whole thing, well, I even liked it in there, blows the sound out of your face. And there are times when I've been designing the sounds where I've only realised something's gone wrong when my headphones are on the other side of the room. I've literally thrown them off and I'm feeling sick because the noise was so intensely loud. Because if you do plug the wrong thing with the wrong thing, it can break. And so you obviously don't want to do that in schools or nightclubs, to be honest. Nobody wants that. And so when I know that a particular parameter to the synthesizer is going to sound horrendous, I actually have a thing which stops you from doing it. It's a safety system. And so I really make the best effort to stop you from making hideous sound. So I was about to blow the speakers out here, but it actually stopped me from. I mean, I also have limiters and compressors and all that stuff on the end of the chain, but this just actually stops it from sounding horrible. So let's go back to something that's going to work, right? So right, that's fun. But maybe I don't want to actually just do an arpeggiator. Maybe you want to do some sort of scale or something, right? So I want to actually tick through some notes which are going to have some known property. So now I can use a variable to store my notes and actually say I want my notes to be a scale. What kind of scale do you want? It starts with M. It's quite a lot. So now we're using musical notation and theory to actually work with our system. Maybe we want to have start at E1. So now we can start playing this a bit. Maybe we want to get snippets in there. bass drum going. So you can have multiple live loops going at once. But you don't have to play things in order, right? That's a bit boring over and over again. So I can take this list of notes in my scale, like a deck of cards, and just shuffle it. And make more of them. So all I'm doing there is taking a list of notes, shuffling them, and it just starts to sound a bit more musical, right? And so you can really start to play with the system in ways that are actually perhaps would have been much more complicated if you would manually choose and write things down. But when you ask the computer to do it for you, it's actually quite simple to do. And you're not limited to making dance music with this thing. Each of these live loops can have its own tempo, so you can make weird polyrhythmic, non-grid-like music if you want to. If you're into your avant-garde music concrète, you can do that kind of thing with this. It just happens to be pretty cool, just making beats for people to dance to, because the rhythmical structure. Yeah, and just to sort of tie up all these things, in the help system, there is this tutorial, as I said before, to work out all the things I've shown you and a lot more. There is a bunch of examples in here that you can just cut and paste in. So here's something really simple, which is the sample perk bell. So that's just a bell sound, but we saw we can change the rates. What we didn't see actually, which is actually also quite fun, is we can do this. What's this going to do? Backwards. There we go. Very slow. There it is. Right. So I guess I can say, well, actually, can you randomly choose a number between backwards and forwards and sleep for a non-uniform time, a random time between 0.1 seconds and 2 seconds? I can create something which is a bit more not structured, but quite interesting.
Do you know the length of time these samples run for to be able to sort of like repeat them?
Well, no. So the way to think about this is that all I'm talking about is when to trigger the sample. So I'm not waiting for the sample to finish before I do the next thing.
You do the sleep there, so
Yeah. So the sleep. So yes. So if the sleep time is less than the length of the sample, they will overlap. So if you wanted to wait, like with the drum rhythms, we don't want to overlap. We want to play the sample, then play it again, and play it again. So then we do need to make sure that we sleep for the right amount of time.
So that, previously you did a sample that you played, and you knew it was 8 seconds.
Yeah. Oh right.
It's a sleep aid, so
Yeah,
if you
that's a
done
good question.
sleep
So
aid-
if I have like a sample loop, let's go for drums, sample loop industrial, right? I know this one isn't a whole number of seconds, which I'm using it. So let's assume it's 1 second. It's not quite right, so it's a bit, it's off 1, right? So maybe, is it like 1.1? No, it's shorter than that, maybe 0. So now we're into ridiculous territory, right? Well, it's about 0.9, that's okay. But actually, we don't want to be figuring this out live. That's not what we want to do. So there's 3 different ways of doing this. One is to actually say, well, actually just sleep for the sample duration of loop industrial. Where are we? Oh, we've gone past it. Oh, it's I, not you. Sorry, in my head. Right, so that will work. The problem with that, though, is if then we use the slicer effect, say, which slices the sound in and out rhythmically, this slices at the default rate of 60 BPM, which is hidden inside the system. You can change that. But this loop isn't going around at 60 BPM. It's going to something different. So it's just going to sound off, right? So although that approach works for doing the loop, it doesn't work very well when you're working with other timing things. I mean, this is super advanced stuff I'm showing you now, but it's all there. So although this approach might make sense, you should never use it. The other approaches, which are both going to work, is to sleep for, say, 1 second, but then change it then to the sample to match 1 second, right? So I'm going to stretch or shrink the sample to fit into time. So now the slicing works, right? If I take the slicing out, everything works, that's good. But notice as that actually just changed the pitch of the sample, so maybe that's not what you want. If it's a melodic sample, it's gonna break. If it's a melodic sample in C, it's now sort of C sharp a bit. That's not gonna work. But that's one approach. With rhythmic stuff, this is what I do all the time. But another approach, which is much more fun, is actually to say, well, I can either stretch the sample or I can stretch time. Let's do that. So we can stretch time with this use BPM command. It will change what the default BPM is. It's by default it's 60. So every time I talked about 1 as 1 second, it's not actually, it's a lie. It's a beat. And because the BPM is such that 1 beat is 1 second, I can go into schools and say seconds. I don't have to talk about BPM. But I can actually change the BPM to be 61 or 62. So I can figure out what's the right BPM for this. So by tuning this in, I'm getting there, right? But again, this is like figuring out what the length of time of sleep is. So instead of tuning it in manually, what I can also do is I can say use sample BPM and say, well, actually change the BPM so that 1 second or 1 beat is the length of the sample. So now everything works. And we've got the sample of the original rates, but time has changed. And I can now FX slicer, and everything just works. But the other approach, actually, this one is quite fun because I can say use beat stretch 1, but now I can change the BPM to be something much faster. Everything just works, right? So you can really, all these options are there to play with and move around. So manipulating time, stretching things is all built in and works really nicely. Does that make sense? Yeah, I don't know how long I've got left before I think I'm running out of my time now, but yeah, I think we've got time for questions as well, but yes.
Can I record a sample?
Can you record us? Yes, so if you have anything that could record things, so either your computer with a sound card or your iPhone, you just record it as a WAV file, which is the most basic kind of file that every single recorder will be able to output. It's uncompressed, just this straight file. Then you put that on a USB stick, plug it in, and then you can play it.
Oh, I think I meant, can a kid using this do that?
Well, they would have to do it externally and then bring it in.
What about Audacity?
So you could use Audacity, for example, which is a free software, to record your sound in, and then get the file, and then play it back. If you're doing it in school, that could be a whole lesson of let's record some sounds, and let's look about how sounds are actually turned into numbers, which is where the speaker needs to be in and out, and do all that kind of stuff. And then with the sounds they made in the next lesson, they can go and play it back. And the secret to doing that is I can say, put a path to my sample, and if this is in the file system, it will play it back for me. So I can play any system on my hard drive, just by putting a path to it. In fact, even if I have a whole folder of samples, which if you're a musician, you'll tend to have like gigabytes of samples in lots of folders. There's really sophisticated ways of working with large sets of folders. So you don't need to type in the name of every sample. You can say, actually, for example, this is my code I have for my sets. And here's lots of different sample sets I'm working with, and these are folders full of sounds. And so I'm just creating shortcuts so I don't have to type the whole thing out. So I can just say sample, ebit, beat, and this is a folder of lots of different beat samples. But by putting the folder name, I get the first sample in the folder. But I can actually index into it. So I can start working with that. I can even say, well, I know this sample here is actually 100 underscore drum loop. So the sample set actually put the BPM of the sample as part of the file name. So if I have a sample set which is well named and structured like this, I can even say, find me all samples that contain 100 in their name. So now I can start working around all ones with the same BPM, right? So this kind of thing. And if I have I have another one which I was doing before, Cine, Rock Piano. I know this is in C sharp minor, so I can say C sharp minor and get me. And are there any other samples like this? There's two actually, so I can move between the two which match these things, so I can work with things which work. So again, this is not something you might do in a school unless you're doing music lessons, which you totally should do. But you get this to try and communicates that even though things are really simple to teach with, if you want to spend time learning something like this, then there's a huge amount of depth to go down. And that's no different from a piano or a guitar. Right? Everyone could pick up well, they can't pick up a piano, that would be amazing if you could. Everyone can go to a piano and make some noise, right? Everybody could do that. Everyone goes to a guitar and make some noise. But if you spend enough time, you can master the piano and you can master guitar, and the things you can do as a master are going to be fabulous. And this has to be the same for this system. I don't want the system just be something that you can just go and pick up and use, but when you want to start using it in interesting ways, it just stops. The depth isn't there. And lots of education systems are exactly like this. They're designed to teach things to a certain level, and then they stop. And I thought that's, to me, it's such a shame. And tools like Scratch, which we mentioned earlier, don't have that shallow thing. They really are deep. They're beautifully deep in ways people don't realise. I was talking earlier that I've started to see teachers talking about the fact that they can't get kids to use PowerPoint anymore. Why is that? Well, in Scratch, you just drag a block that says, put that image there. You drag another block which says, take that image and move it over there. You drag another block which says, swap from those images to these images. What am I describing? I'm describing PowerPoint. Right? If you can do that with code in ways that you can really control, that PowerPoint does not give you that ability, why on earth would you bother using a system with less power? Just because it's, and not just less power, but you have to pay money for it. Scratch is entirely free. So, yes?
In answer to the recording, presumably if they've all got Solid Pi on their computers, they just email each other the program.
Yeah, so there are two ways. We can either talk with sounds, right? So you're talking about recording sounds. But yes, the cool thing about this is, as you can see from the examples, if I have made my composition, let's actually go for the this re-rails track, Daft Punk style track. I got my composition, I could just email it to somebody, they can paste it into Sonic Pi, and then they can press run, and then they can play it back. So like compositions is just text.
When's the phone app coming out?
There's no phone app coming out. How are you going to type on your phone like that?
Well, no, they could swap their composition from the night before by just sending it to somebody else who can play it through their Sonic Pi on there.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the sending part is just an email, or it's like using a website and cutting and pasting it from it. So you could imagine a phone app that could play back things, but then that's just going to be a WAV file or an MP3. The benefit of having the text is A, to study it, just like studying Western notation, but B, once it's playing, I can start to perform with it, right? So I can take the drums out. Take the bass drums out, bring the bass drums in with a lower cut off. So I'll play with it, and then maybe changing the bit crusher to a crush, which is pretty cool. The next time round it's going to sound different. And then we're shuffling here, as we did before, this E minor pentatonic scale, and that shuffle happens to have that riff, which is quite nice. But this, like with shuffling, we can shuffle in many different ways, right? So in computer science, I use random seeds to tell it where to do the shuffling. So I can say use random seeds, and then put a number in here. I happen to know that this one sounds pretty good, so I spent a long time playing with lots of different numbers. And if I have 4 octaves, so I can now jump to a new melody by just choosing a different point. We're off, right? Yeah.
Can you save the performance?
Can I save a performance? That's an excellent question. It does that on a broad level right now. So every time I press run, it stores the current code using Git in an internal system, which is a version control system. So it has a timestamped version of all the text I've run. But I am working on being able to store the entire performance in a replayable format, so I can not just send you a text file of a composition, but send you it'll be like a series of text files representing the performance. You will be able to load it up, play the performance back, but also overtake it at some point. So actually I'm going to take over. So in terms of being able to learn about how the performers have worked with the system, you'll be able to both listen to it, study it, and then you'll be able to take a small snippet of it. So bit between minutes and 1.5 minutes, that was wicked. Grab that and put it in my performance for next time. So you're able to then work with parts of people's performances in ways that we can't do normally. Yes?
How are you going to store the randomly generated stuff?
That's a really good question. So when you're using randomization, like that shuffle for example, I want this code to do the same on this computer as yours, right? Well, so the seed helps, yeah, absolutely, and the random number generator system, actually, there's a set of rolled dice that I load up the same one every time. So if it's the same. And it's the same on a PC, on a Mac,
Can you record MIDI files as output?
No. The question was, can you record MIDI files and output? Not yet. You might be able to do that. But
the output is just a MIDI.
the output to this is something called Open Sound Control, which is much more powerful than MIDI. MIDI goes from 7 bits of representation, which is rubbish. And this you can pass so many different more control parameters than you can in MIDI across. And so the synthesizer that underlies this system is something called Super Collider. It's a much more high bandwidth mechanism for communicating. But you could imagine storing some low res aspect of this as MIDI, but it really is a limiter, not a power. But what I am working on is being able to output MIDI in real time so that you can power things like Ableton Live and Repro and all the software.
So Raspberry Pi can actually handle that generation?
All of the examples built into the examples can play on a Raspberry Pi 1, which is also the Raspberry Pi 0. But like this track uses 95% of the CPU. So I have having to do some tricks in this code which you can't see, which are a little bit less elegant than what I normally do when I'm performing, to get it to run on a Raspberry Pi 1. On a Raspberry Pi, Raspberry Pi 2 or 3, it screams, it's no problem at all. So I designed the system specifically to run on low-powered hardware. So if I go to a gig with this thing, it's going to be really hard to push it to its limits.
How does it fail then? How does it exhibit the fact that it hasn't got the power to do it?
It starts to glitch. So what happens is that the synthesizer basically has a tree of computation it has to perform, and it traverses that tree 44,000 times a second. Right, and then the result of that tree is to spit out numbers to the sound card, which is where the speaker needs to go out. So it has to traverse that tree within a very small window of time. So if the tree gets bigger, then it can't honour that. So it's like halfway through the tree, and the sound card's saying, "What's the next value?" And it's like, "I haven't got one for you." So the sound card gets fed 0, and so these are called X runs. And so the sound then will just go dead for a bit and then back up again. But that dead is for milliseconds, so it just starts to jitter in and out in really weird ways.
So does it tell you that, by the way, I haven't got enough power?
So you can hear it, yeah.
Right.
I
You
haven't
haven't noticed that it's got...
it just craps out basically. Yeah, and it's like, oh, okay. And actually on the Raspberry Pi 1, this is actually a fun thing to do because it's very easy to do that because it's so low powered, is to actually get the program just to the point where it starts doing that and keep it there. That can make it sound really interesting and unpredictable ways.
It might be your favourite effect of it.
Yeah. And you're sort of surfing that edge of what's possible.
When you move it on something more powerful, it doesn't sound the same.
Precisely, exactly, yeah. More question? Are we in like a question period now? So,
We've got about 20 more minutes.
Yeah.
Probably can do a little performance towards the end.
yeah. Do you want me to do a little performance towards the end? Thank you very much.
What's the workflow of the program when it comes to live edition? Because you could make a typo and then you should never stop in the middle of a live
Yeah, so if I've got like 2 live loops, foo, a live loop bar, and I'm playing this sample loop industrial with a beat stretch of 1, seeking for 1, and I've got this doing sample bass drum house, say, seeking for 0.5. Got 2 things going. You do always make a mistake. Then that dies, but that live loop dies, but this one carries on running, so it's multi-threaded. Right, so if you've got everything in one live loop, it will just kill the sound. So you want to have on multiple live loops to hedge your bets, essentially. So when you make a mistake, it's not going to bring the whole sound down. Then you've got to then fix a mistake. But if you bring it back, look, it's not right. Right? So let's break it again. So this is where I built this really cool system called the synchronization mechanism. I can say, well, actually, can you synchronize yourself with foo? So synchronize with foo, and we're back in again, right? So you can do that. So because you basically, even though you're a careful typist, it's 2 in the morning, you've had a couple of pints, you're sweating, your fingers are all slipping over the keyboard, you will make mistakes. And so you want the system to be able to handle that gracefully, and also to be able to get back to where you were before gracefully. So it's got all those things built in. Again, this is not what you would have for a classroom, but they're there, right? You just have to write some more, you need to know what they are and write those words, and then you can have the ability to synchronize. And these threads are working with each other. I've written academic papers describing a timing model with formal semantic proofs that it's sound and all this kind of nonsense. So yes, the internal system is beautiful. I'm really happy with it. But the kids don't need to know any of that stuff. They just need to know play and sleep, sample and sleep, live loop, sample, sleep, done. Right? And then if you want multiple things to synchronize, just to say sync with this is the live loop. And what this does is that before the live loop starts, it waits for this live loop to go round, and then they both carry on. Right? So it's just it's a bit like in an orchestra. The conductor will say 3, 2, 1, off you go, and cue in the bass, and 3, 2, 1, cue in the flutes. And so this cue message is musically cueing in parts of the system. Yeah, any more questions?
Sorry. Have you written anything for, simple classroom use?
Yes, so on the Raspberry Pi website, I closely collaborated with the Raspberry Pi Foundation for this. There's a scheme of work that I've written, and that's been modified by them as well, which is free available to download for computer science lessons. On this other website, it's called sonicpiliveencoding.com. There's a scheme of work for music as well. Both of those resources are linked to from the Sonic Pi website. So you just go there. There's a book as well you can download with some examples and some simple things to do. That's also free. Everything's free. Yes, so there's stuff for classrooms, there's stuff for music and computer science. There's Code Club worksheets that Code Club are working on now, which they haven't released yet. But last time I was speaking to people in Code Club, they said they've got them ready to go, so that's cool. So hopefully within a week or two that should be there. So yeah, and there's also teachers around the world tweeting around Sonic Pi, sharing resources as well. So there's lots of teacher-made resources available. And that's something I would encourage more teachers to do, is to share their schemes of work and lesson plans with other teachers, so that we can all hopefully teach these things more effectively in ways that we know work and are reliable. Yeah, does that answer your question? Any more questions? No? So, do you think this is something you might want to play with at home? Yeah, good. Super simple to play with. The thing is that if you do go and play with it at home, you have to realise it's like a violin, right? If I said to you, hey, there's this really cool instrument, it's called a violin, it's free, here, have one, right, take it home, watch how beautifully I can play it. You think, I'm going to do that. You go home, I think that's no good. It sounds so much, it looks so easy. That's because I practice for 2 hours every day live coding. Right, so like when you watch someone skating and they're like an expert skater, it looks just so simple and graceful. So if you do spend time with this, just bear in mind it's going to take you a while to pick it up, but push through that time. And the way I would practice is to write some code like this, and then before you press run, sit there and go, what's it going to do? And have a think about it. And even if you don't really know what's going on, just try it, right? Then press run and go, whoa, totally not what I expected. Stop it, and then see if you can reason why you originally thought it was going to sound like that and what it does sound like. And one way to do that is to start changing it. And when you change it, you say, if I change this to 2, I'm expecting it to do this, and then see if that's right. And just spend time doing that. And although that sounds painful, before long, you'll soon be able to predict what it's going to do. And then the cool thing happens is when you reverse that. So in your head you say, I'd like the music to do this, and now I know the code to write to make that happen. And that's then when you can perform. But to get to that point, you need to be able to understand what it's doing. And so that's just this sort of sitting down and figuring it out period of time. And don't worry if it sounds rubbish, because it will sound rubbish. Again, that's the thing of, you keep changing things until it sounds good. Right? And often it will sound good just randomly without even, that sounds wicked. And then just take that code and save it. So then you can get back to it the next time, right? So one way to work with the system is just change it, play around, rubbishy, horrible, awesome. Now I have the code and I can share it with my friends, I can reproduce it, I can take that bit and add it to my final composition. So those are 2 pieces of advice. So shall I do some music for you? What kind of music would you like? Quiet music, loud music, fast music, like this is the thing, right? Guitars, you want some guitars? I've got guitar samples.
Now some lyrics, please.
I've got someone speaking. Let's get this in there like this and then sleep for 8 seconds.
Precisely the same programs creating right now.
It's going round.
Complexity. With neutron create precisely the same programs creating right now. These tools of complexity. With neutron create precisely the same programs. I did see right now for a long time. These tools of complexity. With neutron create precisely the same programs. I did see right now for a long time. Java, I did C#. With neutron create precisely the same programs. I did see right now for a long time. Java, I did C#.
It's just 3 samples with some reverb. It's a DSL, it's a domain-specific language I don't know Ruby. okay?
Thanks everyone, thanks for coming. Thanks for doing this stuff. Hope you all have a solid pie. This is Dan. We were talking about the art of collaboration. Explaining how you.
Oh, God, yes. We've been talking about it for ages, yeah.
Workshop, and then we need to go on to month later. Yeah,
I'm trying to buy it. We've been working on these systems for about 10 years now.
It's fantastic. How is it what do you use?
Ruby, but Ruby is really a language that
Yeah.
so that can make it easy to learn.
Like this sound, yeah.
For real-time services, it's fine, right? You can use Superlight to do that stuff. And that's extremely well written C++ code.
I know.
Heritage, guideline, really good tech. So with Ruby, which is about interface, Superlight is about real-time synthesis, putting them together is fine. All the time, it really doesn't manage the time.
Yeah.
Roughly doesn't have time. And then Superlight acts like a German.
We were chatting about collaboration. Shares. Capture that.
Really advanced. That part, I can see that part is a little bit more articulated, just showing the.
Exactly. Showing the code.
Yeah. Still though, it's great because I like the fact that it's zoomed down to the MSP code, so you can pass it on.
There's a lot of other systems. One of many. The difference with this deal systems is that made it as simple as possible.
Oh yeah, I can tell.
That's the difference. And then
I love that you was a twin.
Yeah. Talking about that, tell me about it. You have Alice's, you can, yeah.
I always forget the code, to be honest.
No, sorry, Alice's in the sense of, no, Alice.
Alice. Oh, yeah, so you use variables.
Yeah, but can you actually do stuff? You kind of skip on some corners and things in your syntax.
Oh, yeah. If you make a mistake, it blows up.
Okay, it does. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know sometimes you have
Side tries to
color
lie, whatever.
Yeah, that would produce.
No idea what that is. Yeah, if I have it to be almost right, like blue,
Oh, it's just across the buffers.
yeah, across the front. Yeah.
No, what I meant is sometimes you sample and you
Sample.
exactly. I saw you using sample without the cognitive.
Yeah, that was my. I didn't go into.
Oh.
These are my shortcuts.
Oh, I see.
So this is actually just creating a function which returns this.
I see.
So therefore, I just had to type all this nonsense in before us.
Yes.
I can just type E plus OS pattern.
Yes. But instead, when you don't use that, what do you?
Well, so I could where's my top loops, right? So could erase this. So I could write sample.
For instance, I saw you using array.
Yeah, I could do this.
Yes. And that makes sense. Yeah.
Right? Or I could say A equals that, now I can do this. But that requires me to use variables to have that.
Yes.
I create a function. Fine, so if I do that, and then another buffer, do this, doesn't work.
Yeah.
A is, right? So the way around that is I can define A to B. This, and that creates a function which is global. Now it's going to work.
Oh, okay. Even across buffers.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's all in the big.
I'm going to make it so it's isolated.
Okay.
At the moment it's not. So yes, so my Aravane, whatever it was, folder of Aravane samples.
Yeah, I love it.
Aravane's fabulous. So he made this sample set.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Which I bought, yeah. For another piece of software, which is
I think it's one of these records is completely free and it's been free. It's beautiful stuff.
Well, no,
I remember, but apart.
Just finding out